The Iron Warriors were the 4th legion of the original 20 Space Marine legions, specialized in the breaking of sieges and assaults on static fortifications, which made them great rivals of the Imperial Fists Legion, said to construct the greatest static defenses in the Imperium. It was this rivalry between the legions and between their primarchs Perturabo and the Imperial Fists, Rogel Dorn, that helped turn the Iron Warriors to chaos. Like the members of the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Loyalist Iron Hands chapter, the Iron Warriors have a strong predilection for replacing parts of their body with cybernetic enhancements. When struck with a mutational gift from the ruinous powers, most Iron Warriors simply cut off the mutated appendage, if possible, and replace it with a mechanical one. The Iron Warriors were the Emperor's finest siege troops, and their primarch, Perturabo, was the equal of Rogel Dorn in the arts of fortification. Yet, Perturabo felt himself sidelined by his brother Primarch, whose every proud boast was, to the master of the Iron Warriors, an insult. When the Horus Heresy came, it was perhaps inevitable that the two Primarchs should find themselves on opposite sides of the galactic civil war. Perturabo grew up upon the world of Olympia, a mountainous planet divided into constantly warring city-states. The infant was found by the servants of Demikos, the so-called tyrant of Lakos, and raised by him as his own. The young Primarch, however, never fully accepted his lot, and became cold and mistrustful of others. Despite his aloof demeanor, Perturabo learned from the culture in which he found himself. The arts of the siege for Olympia's warring city-states afforded plenty of opportunity to study both the theory and the practice of this highly specialized branch of warfare. When the Great Crusade finally reached Olympia, and the Emperor told Perturabo of his place in the wider galaxy, the Primarch pledged his devotion to the fledgling Imperium and assumed the mantle of the Primarch of the Iron Warriors Legion. According to established practice, the Primarch was declared Lord of the world on which he had been raised, effectively deposing his adopted father, and the 4th Legion began the process of inducting new recruits from the most able candidates amongst its peoples. In the campaigns that followed, the Iron Warriors proved themselves amongst the most able siege troops in the Emperor's armies. Perturabo was possessed of a keen, cold, and calculating mind well suited to the highly technical aspects of such a style of warfare. Furthermore, he was gifted with an affinity with advanced technology and able to debate the finer points of the most esoteric arts with the highest placed adepts of the Mechanicum. The Iron Warriors received cross-training on Mars, further refining this specialization until only the Imperial Fists of Rogel Dorn could equal their expertise. World after world that rejected the future espoused by the Emperor's iterators capitulated when confronted with the prospect of a protracted siege by the Iron Warriors, and countless worlds were brought to Imperial compliance that would otherwise have been devastated in bitter and ultimately pointless wars. Yet, Perturabo appears to have grown ever more resentful of his role within the Great Crusade, and perhaps in an effort to prove his superiority over Dorn and others amongst his brother Primarchs, he accepted ever more arduous missions on behalf of his legion. Worlds considered by others as unbreakable were cracked open by the methodical application of overwhelming force, yet this approach to war took a remorseless toll even on the superhuman Space Marines. Grueling preparation culminated in brief but extreme violence, and soon the Iron Warriors came to prefer a besieged defender to defy them rather than to surrender, so that the pent-up pressure of siege warfare could be released in the moment of his total defeat. To make matters worse, the Iron Warriors came to be utilized as garrison troops, small forces detached from the Legion, and tasked with guarding the worlds they had worked so hard to bring to compliance. While other Primarchs refused point-blank to see their legions used in such a way, Perturabo acceded, though with ever poorer grace. As the tragic outbreak of the Horus Heresy grew closer, it appears that Perturabo was put under ever-increasing pressure, and as a result the fires of his bitterness were stoked to a raging inferno. Some have postulated that it was the War Master Horus himself, who, time after time, engineered events and adjusted deployments to the Primarch's detriment, and further stoked his sense of tremendous grievance. Whatever the truth, events came to a head when, following the death of the tyrant of Lakos, the people of Olympia rebelled against the rule of the Iron Warriors. Perturabo's anger was finally unleashed, and upon his return to his homeworld, the Primarch enacted such fearsome vengeance that countless innocents were slaughtered and entire cities burned. In the aftermath of his vengeance, Perturabo knew utter despair, barely able to comprehend the crimes he had committed in his rage. But before he could set about righting his terrible deed, word came of the War Master's virus bombing of Istvan III, and the Iron Warriors were ordered to confront the rebels and bring them to justice. History records little of the machinations Horus must surely have enacted in order to turn the bitter Perturabo to the cause of the traitors. But whatever the truth, the Iron Warriors turned upon their brothers at Istvan V, and in so doing sealed their damnation for all time. At last freed of the constraints that had bound him, Perturabo gave free rein to his most destructive urges, laying waste to world after world in the War Master's service. While one part of the Fourth Legion turned Olympia and its surrounding star systems into an empire of iron, another lent its expertise to the siege of Terra, and at last, the sons of Perturabo could test themselves against those of Rogel Dorn. It cannot be known whether Dorn's masterfully constructed defenses would have proved the undoing of the Iron Warriors, for the War Master was slain before the matter could be fully determined. Those Iron Warriors that had taken part in the siege of Terra fled to the Eye of Terror with the remainder of the traitors, while those that had established their own empire around Olympia prepared themselves for the inevitable assault by the Loyalist legions. In a reversal of fortune typical of the grim epoch that ushered in the age of the Imperium, the Imperial Fists were amongst those who laid siege to these Iron Warriors, and while the traitors were eventually dislodged, it was only after a decade-long campaign that culminated in them detonating their nucleonic stockpiles and reducing Olympia to a blasted waste. Perhaps the most infamous of all of Perturabo's campaigns, and, so it is said, the deed that earned him the dark blessing of apotheosis to a demon Primarch, took place upon the world of Sebastus IV. Here, the Primarch constructed the most fearsome of fortifications, a mighty fastness ringed all about with kilometer after kilometer of trenches, redoubts, minefields, and razor wire. While most fortresses serve the purpose of defending something, and are thus limited in their utility, the so-called Eternal Fortress had been constructed with but one purpose in mind: to defy the proud boasts of Rogel Dorn and to lure him into a trap from which he could not escape. Despite the protestations of his brother Guilliman, Dorn succumbed to Perturabo's boast that none could take his fortress, and led the entire Imperial Fists Legion into what would later become known as the Iron Cage. What followed was death and destruction on an unprecedented scale. Not since the height of the Horus Heresy had a Space Marine Legion suffered such losses as the Imperial Fists when they dropped straight into the midst of a grand entrapment. As more of his warriors fell to the rouses of the well-prepared Iron Warriors, Dorn's captains counseled the Legion, asking to fall back and regroup, for they could accept what he could not. The Imperial Fists had been bested, and in a siege no less. At length, Rogel Dorn could not, and did not, give the order to withdraw. Rather, Guilliman decided that he could not stand by as his brother brought about his own defeat and that of his legion, and so he deployed the Ultramarines to relieve the Imperial Fists. Faced with two entire legions, Perturabo evacuated his own, knowing that he had achieved what he had set out to do. By the end of the battle, the Imperial Fists had lost an incredible 400 battle brothers, with many more wounded. Perturabo offered up the precious, uncorrupted gene seed, which his legion had taken from the Imperial Fists, to the Chaos Gods for the use of the traitor legions, and apotheosis was his reward. In the 41st millennium, the Iron Warriors remain a constant thorn in the side of the Emperor's realm. From their demon world of Medringard in the Eye of Terror, Iron Warriors warbands under the command of various warsmiths often strike out in search of new spoils and technology to enhance their own capabilities. The Iron Warriors work closely with the heretics of the Dark Mechanicum and have proven capable of unleashing fiendishly potent new demon engines upon the servants of the Imperium. Founded as its brother Space Marine legions were on Terra during the closing stages of the Unification Wars. Its first muster grounds are noted to have been founded atop the wreckage of a recidivist fortress on the Oro Plateau of Sek Amrak. The warlike gun tribes, blood greaves, and tech enclaves in the surrounding area provided the Legion with much of its earliest waves of recruits as the recalcitrant region was brought fully into the fold of Terran unification, rapidly becoming one of the most stalwart of loyalist domains. Documentary evidence attests that the 4th Legion's gene seed showed an above-average adaptability, and rates of implant rejection were notably low, particularly in comparison with difficulties in large-scale implantation encountered with other progenoid types, which would not be eliminated until the acquisition of the Selenar gene labs of Luna. This advantage meant that the 4th Legion's fighting strength was built rapidly, expanding to several fully battle-ready battalions in size, while some of the other nascent legions were still yet unable to field more than an active sentry. This in turn meant that the 4th Legion was very swiftly put to active service alongside the Dark Angels and White Scars. The 4th Legion fought first on Terra in the destruction of the final resisting elements, and then throughout the pacification of the Sol system. Testament to this fact can be found in surviving frescoes in the Imperial Palace, according them with the battle honors of the Cyto-Tyre Orbital, the Zydex Archipelago, Ice Station Echo, and Mayor Yasht. The lattermost of these names is perhaps the most noteworthy, as it was the key battle of the punishing Venusian campaign, and its citation accords the serried ranks and proud steel banners of the 4th Legion as going forth and into battle under the direct command of the Emperor himself to break the back of the deadly litho-golem armies of the Venusian war witches. It appears that the 4th Legion's early successes were accordingly rewarded with primary resupply of newer classes of weapons and war machines, as they were made available from the Emperor's alliance with Mars, as well as a noteworthy short-term increased intake of Terran recruits originally intended for the Emperor's children, swelling its numbers further to replace ongoing losses accrued in battle. It was by this gene seed adaptability and proven success in battle that the 4th Legion became one of the most numerous of the Legion's Astartes during the earliest years of the Great Crusade, enabling its forces to successfully split between several substantial early expeditionary fleets. Most notable of these was the 8th Expeditionary Fleet, in which it formed the key and leading elements. This force conquered or reclaimed 29 Corward system clusters, and annihilated several interstellar Xenos realms in a protracted 11 standard year campaign, which played a key part in the establishment of the Imperium's control of the Segmentum Solar. All were achievements for which it was recognized and commended by the Emperor in turn. The 4th Legion took from the 8th Expeditionary Fleet the emblem of the winged bolt as its first heraldic device, and displayed its battle honors with pride, carrying them as Vixilla standards before the dauntless columns of its legionaries, as they advanced into shot and shell across dozens of worlds conquered by the force of the 4th Legion's arms. As the forces of the Great Crusade went beyond the boundaries of the Segmentum Solar, pushing onwards with the Great Crusade's expansion, several sources note that the 4th Legion, which was not to be united with its Primarch until the late 840 of N30, had quickly lost any specific ties to Terra, either by culture or indeed recruit intake pattern, although as it pushed ever onwards at the forefront of expansion, its military formation remained rigidly unchanged. The 4th Legion's adherence to the organizational structures, fighting methods, and panoply laid out as a pattern for the Legion's Astartes at the very beginning of the Great Crusade remained consistent, with no fresh stamp of a new culture brought by interaction with a Primarch for many Terran years. As a result, its methods of warfare too went largely unaltered. Regardless of circumstances or enemy, the Legion was to overcome any obstacles or difficulties they faced with relentless and meticulously applied force of arms alone. These combined factors set them out as being increasingly different from many of their brother legions, as by this period of the Great Crusade, most Space Marine legions were now divergent from the basic Terran pattern set as the template during their first muster, regardless of whether or not they had been united with their Primarch. Unlike the 4th Legion, their brother legions had, within the space of a few short solar decades, evolved to demonstrate recognizable, and, in some cases, extreme character traits and modes of warfare of their own that erred considerably from the basic pattern, and to these the constancy and pragmatism of the 4th Legion's operations stood out in contrast. These traits labeled them as unimaginative, mechanistic, and even honorless fighters in the minds of certain other Space Marine legions and their masters. Conversely, to some within the Great Crusade's high command, these traits were positive factors, making the 4th Legion arguably more reliable in deployment than some of the more esoteric legions and more ready to meet commands from outside their own legion without complaint. Accordingly, the 4th Legion was increasingly used to fight often inglorious, but vital campaigns of backbreaking attrition and drawn-out bloodshed, and they became in short a workhorse legion, relied upon both for their martial power and their reliability in following orders to the letter. Furthermore, whereas substantially sized legions such as those of Lemon Russ of the Space Wolves, Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands, and Horus and his Luna Wolves refused to split their forces at the behest of minor and merely human theater commanders, the 4th Legion did not balk at any duty to which they were lawfully tasked. They fought repeatedly in thankless sieges and protracted suppression campaigns which demanded the might of the Legion's Astartes to secure victory, but which carried little renown. They also undertook the garrisoning of worlds too dangerous for any but the Legion's Astartes to hold. The 4th Legion had a single charted course whose direction lay in the hands of others. From war zone to war zone, the 4th Legion went without rest or fanfare, taking bleak pride in its largely thankless work. So the Legion subtly began at last to change, just as its formerly great strength in numbers was bled through attrition, and its brother legions outpaced it in glory. With the benefit of hindsight, it is perhaps possible to see that it was during these times, even before they were united with their Primarch, that a subtle wedge had been driven between the 4th Legion and its brother legions, creating a fracture that would only worsen in time.